Ivan Pavlenko, From Family to Family, Chapter 1, Part 4.2, Collectivization, read by Natalia Buzova. I remember how my father sat for several long evenings in a row on the blocks, where men gathered to talk the same question over. What to do next? Join the collective farm or hang on? He returned home late at night and continued the same conversation with my mother. One day, Uncle Maxim came to us and said that we must join, otherwise, we would be subjected to repression. He found out about it from Solonucha's brother-in-law, Pavel Yosipovich, who worked as the head of the village council at the time. He received the relevant order from the district. Father put a plow, a harrow, and a scraper on the cart, harnessed the mare, and drove to the artillery yard. Mother wailed in the house, and we sat in the house and only blinked our tearful eyes. At that time, there were no common stables, cowsheds, and pig pens on the collective farm, and people took their horses to the former kulak yards, which became brigade yards. Requisitioned cows, sheep, and pigs were also kept there. Our bulanka was staged in Ivan Prisyazhny's barn, and my father visited it every evening to see if it was fed and watered. But after some time, the exit from the collective farm began. There was a rumor that it was not necessary to enter there. My father took his mare with the cart and livestock home and farmed his land alone for another year, conjugating now with Semen Manivets Provalny, then with Mikhailo Solonucha Olzhenko, then with Dmitro Yurchenko Konchikovs. They were the last of the Mohicans, but the amount of bread to be given to the state was such that my father barely fulfilled it. All that was left was to feed the family and for spring sowing. Meanwhile, the famine of 1933 was creeping up. Stalin decided to finally break the unruly Ukrainian village. In the press, there was an uproar about the fact that the kurkuls and kurkulniks were rotting bread in order not to give it to the working class and thereby destroy the young Soviet state. Towering brigades led by district officials began to be established everywhere. As a rule, one policeman was included in their teams. The party leadership, of course, understood that the village activists would requisition part of the grain from their fellow villagers, but not all of it, and not in every yard. Someone will save his goods with the help of his activist best man or matchmaker or relative or neighbor. Therefore, the towering crews were not referred to their villages. Ours, for example, went to work in Sviridivka, and tugboats from there went to us with the same purpose. Such an exchange excluded any mercy and elevated effectiveness of searches. Activists from other villages took everything, ignoring women's wails and children's cries. Each tug had a long iron probe with a sharp end. He could pierce with it a layer of straw or hay, as well as soil in barns and gardens. Grain was raked out from everyone, whether you were a collective farmer or a single person. But with particular fury, it was sought from those who had not fulfilled the bread donation. They tore up the floor, demolished the chimneys, took away the remains of beans, flour, baked bread, lard, meat, and other products. Advanced towering crews were listed on the district board of honor. The experience was advertised through the press, and those who were lagging behind were oppressed. Labels of class enemy guides were hung on them. Their leaders, representatives of the district committee of the party, heads of village councils were brought to justice for their softness and connivance with the kulaks. Such criticism led to arrest and imprisonment. I remember how once in the middle of winter, tugboats from Bessali arrived. They were led by a hefty and red-beaked leader. They didn't find anything with us. Then a lot of snow had fallen, and my father threw the sacks with grain not into the piles of snow, which drew attention to themselves, but in flat places, even in nearby open areas. And Ivan Pavlenko, my grandma's son-in-law, carried his sacks away into different nooks and crannies, and they were found. There was a large vat of fermented apples in our cellar. The thugs ate a bucket of them and promised to stop by again after finishing their work. In the evening, a loaded trailer stopped near our yacht, and a dozen tugboats crashed into the house. The leader threw a few pieces of lard and meat on the bench, saying to my mother, "Fry it." Mother began to cook, and they sat around the table and began to brag about who had found what, where, and how. Fat and meat were requisitions from Grigory Halivets, the Greek, and when my mother put the frying pan on the table, they pounced on the fresh food like hungry wolves. They drank 3 bottles of moonshine. Mother and father, referring to fasting, did not eat. And for us, the little ones, that luxury teased our noses and stomachs, but we were afraid to even look out of the oven. Towing crews, each more formidable than the other, roamed the countryside almost all winter. But their catch gradually decreased and then stopped at 0. Then potatoes and beets began to be taken away to the account for the areas of bread delivery. Famine began. People swelled at dogs and cats. Dried pulp and crushed linden bark were added to the flour if it was available. People went to the sugar factory for pulp, but the police drove the hungry people away there. It was easier for those whose cow had just had a calf and had milk, as well as those who knew how to catch fish. People took some clothes and scarves out of the chest and went to Russia to exchange them for bread. Some, like Timofey Tkachenko Yatsov's, died on the road. Hungry thieves appeared. At night, they climbed into chicken coops and cellars, and during the day, when the owners were not at home, they climbed into the house through the window and ate everything they found in the pots. Among them were our village teenagers. I will not mention the names of these unfortunates because it was not their fault but grief. Beggars roamed the village, but there was nothing to give them. There were rumors about individual cases of cannibalism in Luka and Sverigivka. During the terrible winter and spring, many families died out. Among them were the Seller families. 1. Ulav Solonuchas. 2. Human Stetsenkos. 3. Philip Manivets Babichs. 4. Vasil Padalkas Kirivsky. 5. Timofey Tkachenko's Yatsunovs. 6. Oleksiy Stetsenko Strapchuks. 7. Ivan Tkachenko Majenkovs. 8. Migal Buheriks. 9. Peace, 2 families. 10. Zhirinovsky. 11. The Bilans. 12. Slivas. And this is without taking into account the repressed kulaks and middle peasants. And there were individual deaths in almost every family. Elderly people and small children died most often. Our grandmother, who lived with Aunt Ulita, through the corridor, as well as 5-year-old Grisha, our cousin. The grandma's son-in-law, Ivan Sergeyevich Solonucha, was poorer than us, but he did not want to go to the collective farm and had not fulfilled the grain payment because his land was poor and unproductive. That's why everything was taken from them. The son-in-law went to Russia and later took my Aunt Ulita and her 2-year-old son Mikhailo with him. At the same time, the best student of our 2nd grade, Fedya Tkachenko Manzenkovs, also died of starvation. In autumn, on the October holiday in the village club, he had received an award from the head of the collective farm for his excellent studies. a checkered shirt and trousers, and by the spring of 1933 he was gone. I also remember how my uncle Prokip Mikitovich, dispossessed and expelled from his parents' house, came to us. He was one of the best landlords in the village, but then he went around people and asked for alms. When he came to us, he sat down heavily on the bench and cried. My mother poured him a bowl of borscht and broke off a piece of surrogate pastry. He ate slowly and told something about his sons and three daughters who had left for no one knows where from their native village. We, the children, looked in horror at his swollen feet, which he took out of his boots and warmed near the oven. His face was thin, swollen, and overgrown. Soon he, his sons Mykola and Peter died. His son Fedos survived and died on the battlefield during the war. Two daughters, Yevdokha and Oksenia, also died, and the youngest, Natalka, hanged herself out of grief. Only the grandson, Mykola, and Yelisaveta's son survived. They hit people as they wanted. They took the dead from the home or picked them up on the road, wrapped them in a row if it was in the house. And several men lowered them in the hastily dug grave. A team of string diggers did that every day. For the work, they were issued products from the collective fund. It is difficult to say how many people died out. Then no one counted them. I think that there were more than 100 people. The same number left for Russia, where there was no famine. But getting there was difficult. The police caught them, removed them from freight cars, and sent them to Stalin's camps. Our family survived both collectivization and hunger. Bread donation, both basic and additional, we managed to donate because our land was good and my father had managed to hide something before the invasion of the tugboats. In addition, a cow calved in the middle of winter and the house smelled of milk. It became easy. It also helped that the father worked for some time with the mayor on the construction of a distillery by order of the village council. There he was given a hot meal 3 times a day and he received bread for the whole week on Saturday and took it home. They offered him to stay at the plant forever. They promised to give him qualifications and an apartment, but he did not agree. The craving for the S1, for the collar that he had worn on himself all his life. When all our bread reserves were exhausted, Mother took out of the chest her old woolen scarves, which father tied around himself, and went to Russia to exchange for bread. The road was difficult and risky. He rode on freight cars, surrounded by hungry and ragged people who could pick, kill, and throw off the wagon. At each station, the police caught those with sacks. Nevertheless, my father returned home safely with 32 kilograms of peas from Kalinin region. It helps us a lot. In the spring, old and young went to the forest for green food, lettuce, primrose, and nettle. People plucked and ate linden buds, acacia flowers, and drank birch sap. Fish was brought from the river. They crawled around the stacks, sifting straw in search of grain. Sometimes they died there. Meanwhile, spring field work was approaching, and people were exhausted. A lot of collective farm horses died, and there was nothing to feed them. As soon as the snow melted, they were driven out to Yarki, to a pasture that was not ready yet, and the horses, scratched and hungry, plucked previous year's dried grass and died. At the 17th Party Congress, Stalin compared the year of 1929 with 1933. This is how the population decreased. 1. Horses from 34 million to 17. 2. Cattle from 68 million to 38. 3. Sheep and goats from 147 million to 50. 4. Pigs from 21 million to 12. It was all over the country. Probably this percentage was much higher in Ukraine. since the Stalinist genocide was the most brutal here, and also in the Kuban, where the former Ukrainian Cossacks lived. There too, there was a terrible famine, and the so-called decossacization was raging.